Was I already live, or were you saying that because you saw the were you saying that because you saw the ad on like Facebook or something about me streaming, or was I on camera at that point without me knowing? Thank you though. Either way. Hair's doing a weird. I hate when the hair in the front does a weird. Ah, okay. Huh? What's going on? It won't let you see the stream? I will check. Oh, okay. I hadn't been streaming yet, if that's like it took me a second. Beep. I was getting a lot of stuff ready, and maybe it was delayed. Oh, weird. Strange. I don't know. But yeah, welcome back everybody. I know it's been a little while. It's been a crazy time. Where oh, thank you. Yeah, so for anybody who doesn't know, my partner was visiting during the last 3 weeks, and we got COVID. Like the whole household got COVID. What's the gift you give to someone who has everything? COVID. No. Anyway, so that was like rough and not fun. I still have a bit of like, I have to like clear my throat a bit every now and then. But I'm good now and feeling so much better than before. So that's good. Hello. And I decided to I wanted to just be cute today, so I decided to do some Sweet Lolita. And yeah, here we are. How have you guys been? How's everybody doing? Oh, thank you. I was like, I accomplished my goal. What does that mean? Like, literally forgot what I was trying to say. Thank you. That's so sweet of you. Sniffly for some reason. Tissue. Just let me know. Not attractive, but it must be done. I'm sorry you have a residual cough. Stuff's really annoying. Yeah, and for anybody who knows Lolita, you'll know that I wore the sugariest of sweet prints, which is Sugary Carnival. And I know a lot of people find the print cringy, but I think it's really cute. I'll go ahead and stand up so you can see like a fuller look of the outfit if you'd like. Toothache Carnival. You're mean. How can you call it Toothache Carnival and then be like, it's not cringy. How could you do that? Well, yeah. I'm wondering. Sorry that I keep like looking. I'm wondering if I got the placement of my cheek glitter right, or if it's kind of weird. My hair is like covering it on that side. Overload of sugar. Yeah, I know how overload of sugar affects the teeth. No, it's okay. I was playing. Back. Okay. I'll stand up really quick so you guys can see, get a look at the cord. That's the downside of wearing a petty, is that you knock over everything. So here we go. Yeah. Nice, fluffy, and cute. Yeah. Anyway, I should probably look at Stardust and see where we last left off, because I don't 100% remember. Let's see. Okay. So Tristran, who decided he was gonna go get the fallen star. I keep thinking that I have schmutz on my scrunchie, but I don't. It's just how it's laying that makes it look like that, and the sheen on it. So Tristran, who decided that he was gonna go into Fairy, and get the fallen star for Victoria, decided. Well, actually, not decided. He just did that. He started on his journey walking into Fairy, and he's like overconfident, and yeah. Okay. This next, this next chapter, this next chapter is titled, in which we encounter several other persons, many of them still alive, with an interest in the fate of the fallen star. Right. Do we love that? Okay. The Stormhold had been carved out of the peak of Mount Huan by the first Lord of Stormhold, who reigned at the end of the First Age and into the beginning of the Second. It had been expanded, improved upon, excavated, and tunneled into by successive masters of Stormhold until the original mountain peak now raked the sky like the ornately carved tusk of some great gray granite beast. The Stormhold itself was perched high in the sky, where the thunder clouds gathered before they went down to the lower air, spilling rain and lightning and devastation upon the place beneath. The 81st Lord of Stormhold lay dying in his chamber, which was carved from the highest peak like a hole in a rotten tooth. There is still death in the lands beyond the fields we know. He summoned his children to his bedside, and they came, the living and the dead of them, and they shivered in the cold granite halls. They gathered about his bed and waited respectfully, the living to his right side, the dead on his left. 4 of his sons were dead, Secundus, Quintus, Quartus, and Sextus, and they stood unmoving, gray figures, insubstantial and silent. 3 of his sons remained alive, Primus, Tertius, and Septimus. Mr. Gaiman, what happened to the Oxford comma? I'm not seeing any use of the Oxford comma in this book, and I don't remember having this gripe with you in the Graveyard book, so what happened? Respectfully, sir. They stood solidly, uncomfortably, on the right of the chamber, shifting from foot to foot, scratching their cheeks and noses as if they were shamed by the silent repose of their dead brothers. They did not glance across the room toward their dead brothers, acting, as best they could, as if they and their father were the only ones in that cold room where the windows were huge holes in the granite through which the cold winds blew. And whether this is because they could not see their dead brothers or because, having murdered them, one apiece, save Septimus, who had killed both Quintus and Sextus, poisoning the former with a dish of spiced eels, and rejecting artifice of efficiency and gravity, simply pushing Sextus off a precipice one night as they were admiring a lightning storm far below. They chose to ignore them, scared of guilt or revelation or ghosts their father did not know. Privately, the 81st Lord had hoped that by the time his end had come upon him, 6 of the 7 young lords at Stormhold would be dead, and but one still alive. That one would be the 82nd Lord of Stormhold and Master of the High Crags. It was, after all, how he had attained his own title several hundred years before. But the youth of today were a pasty lot with none of the get-up and go, none of the vigor and vim that he remembered from the days when he was young. Someday, somebody was saying something. He forced himself to concentrate. "Father," repeated Primus in his deep boom of a voice, "we are all here. What would you do with us?" The old man stared at him. With a ghastly wheezing, he pulled a breath of the thin, chill air into his lungs and then said, in high, cold tones like the granite itself, "I am dying. Soon my time will be done, and you will take my remains deep into the mountains, to the Hall of Ancestors, and you will place them, me, in the 180th hollow you come to, which is to say, the first that is not occupied, and there you shall leave me. If you do not do this thing, you will each be cursed, and the Tower of Stormhold shall tumble and fall." His 3 living sons said nothing. A murmur ran through the 4 dead sons, though. Regret, perhaps, that their remains had been gobbled up by the eagles or carried away by the fast rivers, tumbled down waterfalls and off to the sea, never to rest in the Hall of Ancestors. Now, the matter of succession. The Lord's voice wheezed out of him like the wind being squeezed from a pair of rotten bellows. His living sons raised their heads, Primus the oldest, with white hairs and his thick brown beard, his nose aquiline. His eyes gray, looked expectant. Tertius, his beard red and golden, his eyes a tawny brown, looked wary. Septimus, his black beard still coming in, tall and crow-like, looked blank, as he always looked blank. "Primus, go to the window." Primus strode over to the opening in the rock wall and looked out. "What do you see?" "Nothing, sire. I see the evening sky above us and the clouds below us." The old man shivered beneath the mountain bare skin that covered him. "Tertius, go to the window. What do you see?" "Nothing, father. It is as Primus told you. The evening sky hangs above us the color of a bruise, and clouds carpet the world beneath us, all gray and writhing." The old man's eyes twisted in his face like the mad eyes of a bird of prey. "Septimus, you. The window." Septimus strolled to the window and stood beside, although not too close to, his 2 elder brothers. "And you? What do you see?" He looked out the opening. The wind was bitter on his face, and it made his eyes sting and tear. One star glimmered faintly in the indigo heavens. "I see a star, father." "Ah," wheezed the 81st Lord. "Bring me to the window." His 4 dead sons looked at him sadly as his 3 living sons carried him to the window. The old man stood, or almost stood, leaning heavily on the broad shoulders of his children, staring into the leaden sky. His fingers, swollen knuckled and twig-like, fumbled with the topaz that hung on a heavy silver chain about his neck. The chain parted like a cobweb in the old man's grip. He held the topaz out in his fist, the broken ends of silver chain dangling. The dead lords of Stormhold whispered amongst themselves in the voices of the dead, which sound like snow falling. The topaz was the power of Stormhold. Who wore it would be Stormhold's master, as long as he was of the blood of Stormhold. To which of the surviving sons would the 81st Lord give the stone? The living sons said nothing, but looked respectively, expectant, wary, and blank. But it was a deceptive blankness, the blankness of a rock face that one only realizes cannot be climbed when one is halfway up, and there is no longer any way down. The old man pulled free of his sons and stood straight and tall then. He was, for a heartbeat, the Lord of Stormhold, who had defeated the northern goblins at the Battle of Craglan's Head, who had fathered 8 children, 7 of them boys, on 3 wives, who had killed each of his 4 brothers in combat before he was 20 years old, although his oldest brother had been almost 5 times his age and a mighty warrior of great renown. It was this man who held up the topaz and said 4 words in a long dead tongue, words which hung on the air like the strokes of a huge bronze gong. Then he threw the stone into the air. The living brothers caught their breath as the stone arced up over the clouds. It reached what they were certain must be the zenith of its curve, and then, defying all reason, it continued to rise into the air. Other stars glittered in the night sky now. To he who retrieves the stone, which is the power of Stormhold, I leave my blessing, and the mastership of Stormhold and all its dominions. Sorry, I thought I closed my mail app, so let me go ahead and do that now so we don't get notifications popping in. Said the 81st Lord, his voice losing power as he spoke until once again it was like the creak of an old, old man, like the wind blowing through an abandoned house. The brothers, living and dead, stared at the stone. It fell upwards into the sky until it was lost to sight. And should we capture eagles and harness them to drag us into the heavens? Asked Tertius, puzzled and annoyed. His father said nothing. The last of the daylight faded, and the stars hung above them, uncountable in their glory. 1 star fell. Tertius thought, although he was not certain, that it was the first star of the evening, the one that his brother Septimus had remarked upon. The star tumbled, a streak of light, through the night sky, and it tumbled down somewhere to the south and west of them. There, whispered the 81st Lord, and he fell to the stone floor of the chamber, and he breathed no more. Primus scratched his beard and looked down at the crumpled thing. I've half a mind, he said, to push the old bastard's corpse out the window. What was all that idiocy about? Better not, said Tertius. We don't want to see Stormhold tumble and fall, nor do we want a curse on our heads, for that matter. Better just place him in the Hall of Ancestors. Primus picked up his father's body and carried him back to the furs of his bed. We will tell the people he is dead, he said. The 4 dead brothers clustered with Septimus at the window. What do you think he's thinking? Asked Quintus of Sextus. He's wondering where the stone fell and how to reach it first, said Sextus, remembering his fall down the rocks and into eternity. I damned well hope so, said the late 81st Master of Stormhold to his 4 dead sons. But his 3 sons, who were not yet dead, heard nothing at all. That brings up a good point. Because if you guys have ever seen the movie Stardust, you'll know that, like, the Ghost Brothers and stuff, like, that happens in the movie. That you see the ghosts of the former princes, and you also see the living princes. But I didn't think about it, but shouldn't you then also see the Lord after he's dead? Like, wouldn't you then see him too? Like, wouldn't he join the group? And that doesn't happen in the movie. And I guess maybe they couldn't get the actor. I can't remember exactly who played him, but like, as is the character, he was quite old, and also I'm pretty sure he was pretty famous, so they may not have been able to afford him for that amount of time. I wonder. I can't remember if the Lord stays with the group throughout the whole movie, or if this is just like a momentary thing, but I guess we'll see. A question like, how big is Fairy, does not admit of a simple answer. Fairy, after all, is not one land, one principality or dominion. Maps of Fairy are unreliable and may not be depended upon. We talk of the kings and queens of Fairy as we would speak of the kings and queens of England. But Fairy is bigger than England, and it is bigger than the world, for since the dawn of time, each land that had been forced off the map by explorers and the brave going out and proving it wasn't there has taken refuge in Fairy. So it is now, by the time that we come to write of it, a most huge place indeed, containing every manner of landscape and terrain. Here, truly, there be dragons. Also griffins, wyverns, hippogriffs, basilisks, and hydras. There are all manner of more familiar animals as well: cats affectionate and aloof, dogs noble and cowardly, wolves and foxes, eagles and bears. In the middle of a wood so thick and so deep it was nearly a forest was a small house, built of thatch and wood and daubed gray clay, which had a most foreboding aspect. A small yellow bird in a cage sat on its perch outside the house. It did not sing, but sat mournfully silent, its feathers ruffled and wan. There was a door to the cottage, from which the once white paint was peeling away. Inside the cottage consisted of one room, undivided. Smoked meats and sausages hung from the rafters along with a wizened crocodile carcass. A peat fire burned smokily in the large fireplace against one wall, and the smoke trickled out of the chimney far above. There were 3 blankets upon 3 raised beds, one large and old, the other 2 little more than truckle beds. There were cooking implements and a large wooden cage currently empty in another corner. There were windows too filthy to see through, and over everything was a thick layer of oily dust. The only thing in the house that was clean was a mirror of black glass, as high as a tall man, as wide as a church door, which rested against one wall. Moment time? Do you mean momentai? Like in Digimon? Why are you saying that? Like, what do you mean? Because it's like a take it easy, relax. Was it about my questioning about the Lord? Oh, I said something that sounded like momentai? Huh. Okay. Oh, it's okay. I'm sorry that I missed it when it happened. The house belonged to 3 aged women. What? 3 aged women. They took it in turns to sleep in the big bed, to make the supper, to set snares in the wood for small animals, to draw water up from the deep well behind the house. The 3 women spoke little. There were 3 other women in the little house. They were slim and dark and amused. The hall they inhabited was many times the size of the cottage. The floor was of onyx, and the pillars were of obsidian. There was a courtyard behind them, open to the sky, and stars hung in the night sky above. A fountain played in the courtyard, the water rolling and falling from a statue of a mermaid in ecstasy, her mouth wide open. Clean black water gushed from her mouth into the pool below, shimmering and shaking the stars. The 3 women and their hall were in the black mirror. The 3 old women were the Lilum, the witch queen, all alone in the woods. The 3 women in the mirror were also the Lilum, but whether they were the successors to the old women, or their shadow selves, or whether only the peasant cottage in the woods was real, or if somewhere the Lilum lived in a black hall with a fountain in the shape of a mermaid playing in the courtyard of stars, none knew for certain, and none but the Lilum could say. On this day, one crone came from the woods carrying a store, its throat a splash of red. Oh, sorry, a stoat, rather. Carrying a stoat, its throat a splash of red. She placed it on the dusty chopping board and took a sharp knife. She cut it around at the arms and legs and neck. Then, with one filthy hand, she pulled the skin off the creature, as if pulling a child from its pajamas, and she dropped the naked thing onto the wooden chopping block. "Entrails?" she asked in a quivering voice. The smallest, oldest, most tangle-headed of the women, rocking back and forth in a rocking chair, said, "Might as well." The first old woman picked up the stoat by the head and sliced it from neck to groin. Its innards tumbled out onto the cutting board, red and purple and plum-colored, intestines and vital organs like wet jewels on the dusty wood. The woman screeched, "Come quick! Come quick!" Then she pushed gently at the stoat guts with her knife and screeched once more. The crone in the rocking chair pulled herself to her feet. In the mirror, a dark woman stretched and rose from her divan. The last old woman, returning from the outhouse, scurried as fast as she could from the woods. "What?" she said. "What is it?" In the mirror, a third young woman rejoined the other two. Her breasts were small and high, and her eyes were dark. "Look!" gestured the first old woman, pointing with her knife. Their eyes were the colorless gray of extreme age, and they squinted at the organs on the slab. "At last," said one of them, and "About time," said another. "Which of us, then, to find it?" asked the third. The three women closed their eyes, and three old hands stabbed into the stoat guts on the board. An old hand opened. "I've a kidney. I've his liver." The third hand opened. It belonged to the oldest of the Lilum. "I've his heart," she said triumphantly. "How will you travel?" "In a road chariot, drawn by what I find at the crossroads." "You'll be needing some years." The oldest one nodded. The youngest, the one who had come in from the outhouse, walked painfully slowly over to a high and ramshackle chest of drawers and bent over. She took a rustling iron box from the bottommost drawer and carried it over to her sisters. It was tied around with 3 pieces of old string, each with a different knot in it. Each of the women unknotted her own piece of string. Then the one who had carried the box opened the lid. Something glittered golden in the bottom of the box. "Not much left," sighed the youngest of the Lilum, who had been old when the wood they lived in was still beneath the sea. "Then it's a good thing that we found a new one, isn't it?" said the oldest tartly, and with that she thrust a clawed hand into the box. Something golden tried to avoid her hand, but she caught it, wiggling and glimmering, opened her mouth, and popped it inside. In the mirror, 3 women stared out. There was a shivering and a shuddering at the center of all things. Now 2 women stared from the black mirror. In the cottage, 2 old women stared, envy and hope mixing in their faces, at a tall, handsome woman with black hair and dark eyes and red lips. "My," she said, "but this place is filthy." She strode to the bed. Beside it was a large wooden chest covered by a faded tapestry. She twitched off the tapestry and opened the chest, rummaging inside. "Here we go," she said, holding up a scarlet kirtle. She tossed it onto the bed and pulled off the rags and tatters she had worn as an old woman. Her 2 sisters stared across at her naked body hungrily. "When I return with the heart, there will be years of plenty for all of us," she said, eyeing her sisters' hairy chins and hollow eyes with disfavor. She slipped a scarlet bracelet onto her wrist in the shape of a small snake with its tail between its jaws. "A star," said one of her sisters. "A star," echoed the second. "Exactly," said the Witch Queen, putting a circlet of silver upon her head. "The first in 200 years, and I'll bring it back to us." She licked her scarlet lips with a deep red tongue. "A fallen star," she said. It was night in the glade by the pool, and the sky was bespattered with stars beyond counting. Fireflies glittered on the leaves of the elm tree, and in the ferns, and in the hazel bushes, flickering on and off like the lights of a strange and distant city. An otter splashed in a brook that fed the pool. A family of stoats wove and wound their way to the water to drink. A field mouse found a fallen hazelnut and began to bite into the hard shell of the nut with its sharp, ever-growing front teeth, not because it was hungry, but because it was a prince under an enchantment who could not regain his outer form until he chewed the nut of wisdom. But its excitement made it careless, and only the shadow that blotted out the moonlight warned it of the descent of a huge gray owl who caught the mouse in its sharp talons and rose again into the night. Wow, that's really sad. The mouse dropped the nut, which fell into the brook and was carried away to be swallowed by a salmon. The owl swallowed the mouse in just a couple of gulps, leaving just its tail trailing from her mouth, like a length of bootlace. Something snuffled and grunted as it pushed through the thicket. A badger, thought the owl, herself under a curse and only able to resume her rightful shape if she consumed a mouse who had eaten the nut of wisdom, or perhaps a small bear. That's interesting how that's wound together. The owl inadvertently doomed them both. Leaves rustled, water rilled, and then the glade became filled with light shining down from above, a pure white light which grew brighter and brighter. The owl saw it reflected in the pool, a blazing, glaring thing of pure light, so bright that she took to the wing and flew to another part of the forest. The wild things looked about them in terror. First, the light in the sky was no bigger than the moon. Then it seemed larger, infinitely larger, and the whole grove trembled and quivered, and every creature held its breath, and the fireflies glowed brighter than they had ever glowed in their lives, each one convinced that this, at last, was love, but to no avail. And then there was a crackling sound, sharp as a shot, and the light that had filled the grove was gone, or almost gone. There was a dim glow pulsing from the middle of the hazel thicket, as if a tiny cloud of stars were glimmering there. And there was a voice, a high, clear female voice, which said, "Ow!" And then very quietly it said, "Fuck." And then it said, "Ow," once more. So I need to show you the book for that part, because the text for the little tiny fuck that she utters is actually it's actually much tinier than the rest of the the rest of the text. And then it said nothing at all, and there was silence in the glade. I like how it's like this really pretty, elegant picture that's painted and like tragic picture, and then we have that. We are on chapter 4 now, which is entitled, Can I Get There by Candlelight? Right? Isn't that great? October moved further away with every step Tristran took. He felt as if he were walking into summer. There was a path through the woods with a high hedgerow to one side, and he followed the path. High above him, the stars glittered and gleamed, and the harvest moon shone golden yellow, the color of ripe corn. In the moonlight, he could see briar roses in the hedge. He was becoming sleepy now. For a time, he fought to stay awake, and then he took off his overcoat and put down his bag, a large leather bag of the kind that, in 20 years' time, would become known as a Gladstone bag. And he laid his head on his bag and covered himself with his coat. He stared up at the stars, and it seemed to him then that they were dancers, stately and graceful, performing a dance almost infinite in its complexity. He imagined he could see the very faces of the stars, pale they were, and smiling gently, as if they had spent so much time above the world watching the scrambling and the joy and the pain of the people below them, that they could not help being amused every time another little human believed itself the center of the world, as each of us does. And then it came to Tristran that he was dreaming, and he walked into his bedroom, which was also the schoolroom of the village of Wall. And Mrs. Cherry tapped the blackboard and bade them all to be silent. And Tristran looked down at his slate to see what the lesson would be about, but he could not read what he had written there. Then Mrs. Cherry, who had resembled his mother, so much that Tristran found himself astonished that he had never before realized that they were the same person, called upon Tristran to tell the class the dates of all the kings and queens of England. "Excuse me," said a small, unhairy voice in his ear, "but would you mind dreaming a bit quieter? Your dreams are spilling over into my dreams, and if there's one thing I've never been doing with, it's dates. William the Conqueror, 1066. That's as far as I go, and I'd swap that for a dancing mouse." "Hmm?" said Tristran. "Keep it down," said the voice, "if you don't mind." "Sorry," said Tristran, and his dreams after that were of the dark. Breakfast, said a voice close to his ear. It's mushrooms, fried in butter, with wild garlic. Tristran opened his eyes. Daylight shone through the briar rose hedge, dappling the grass in gold and green. Something smelled like heaven. A tin container was placed beside him. Poor fare, said the voice. Country fare it is. Nothing like the gentry nothing like the gentry I used to. But the likes of me treasures a fine mushroom. Tristran blinked and reached out into the tin bowl and took out a large mushroom between his finger and thumb. It was hot. He took a careful bite, felt the juices flood his mouth. It was the finest thing he had ever eaten, and after he had chewed and swallowed it, he said so. That's kind of you, said the small figure who sat on the other side of a little fire which crackled and smoked in the morning air. Kind of you, I'm sure, but you know and I know that it's just a fried field mushrooms, and never a patch on nothing proper. Is there any more? Said Tristran, realizing just how hungry he was. Sometimes a little food can do that to you. Ah, now, that's manners for you, said the little figure, who wore a large floppy hat and a large flappy overcoat. Is there more? He says, as if we would poach quail's eggs and smoked gazelle and truffles, not a mushroom. What tastes more or less like something what's been dead for a week and a cat wouldn't touch. Manners. I really, truly would like another mushroom, said Tristran, if it's not too much trouble. The little man, if man he was, which Tristran found rather unlikely, sighed mournfully and reached into the pan sizzling on the fire with his knife and flicked 2 large mushrooms into Tristran's tin bowl. Tristran blew on them, then ate them with his fingers. Look at you, said the little hairy person, his voice a mixture of pride and gloom. Eating those mushrooms as if you liked them, as if they wasn't sawdust and wormwood and ruin your mouth. Tristran licked his fingers and assured his benefactor that they had been the very finest mushrooms he had ever had the privilege of eating. He says that now, said his host with gloomy relish. But you'll not be saying that in an hour's time. They'll undoubtedly disagree with you, like the fishwife would disagree with a young man over a mermaid. And that could be heard from Garamond to Stormold. Such language! It fair turned my ears blue, it did. The little hairy personage sighed deeply. Talking about your guts, he said. I'm going to attend to mine behind that tree over there. Would you do me the signal honor of keeping an eye out there, a pack of mine? I'd be obliged. Of course, said Tristran politely. The little hairy man vanished behind an oak tree. Tristran heard a few grunts, and then his new friend reappeared, saying, There, I knowed a man in Paphlagonia. There, I knowed a man in Paphlagonia who swallowed a live snake every morning when he got up. He used to say he was certain of one thing, that nothing worse would happen to him all day. Of course, they made him eat a bowl full of hairy centipedes before they hung him, so maybe that claim was a bit presumptive. Tristran excused himself. He urinated against the side of the oak tree, next to which was a small mound of droppings, certainly not produced by any human being. They looked like deer pellets or rabbit droppings. My name is Tristran Thorn, said Tristran when he returned. His breakfast companion had packed up the morning's breakfast, fire pans and all, and made it vanish into his pack. He removed his hat, pressed it to his chest, and looked up at Tristran. Charmed, he said. He tapped the side of his pack. On it was written, Charmed, Enchanted, Ensorcelled, and Confusticated. I used to be confusticated, he confided, but you know how these things go. And with that, he set off along the path. Tristran walked behind him. Hey, I say, called Tristran, slow down, can't you? Slow down, can't you? For despite the huge pack, which put Tristran in mind of Christian's Burden and Pilgrim's Progress, a book from which Mrs. Cherry had read to them every Monday morning, telling them that, although it was written by a tinker, it was a fine book for all of that. The little man, Charmed? Was that his name? Was moving away from him as fast as a squirrel up a tree. The little creature hurried back down the path. Something wrong? He asked. I cannot keep up, confessed Tristran. You walk so confoundedly fast. The little hairy man slowed his pace. Beg your puddin', he said, as Tristran stumbled after him. Being on me own so much, I gets used to setting me own pace. They walked side by side in the golden green light of the sun through the newly opened leaves. It was a quality of light Tristran had observed unique to springtime. He wondered if they had left summer as far behind as October. From time to time, Tristran would remark on a flash of color in a tree or bush, and the little hairy man would say something like, "Kingfisher, Mr. Halcyon, they used to call him, pretty bird, or pretty hummingbird, drinks nectar from flowers, hovers, or redcap, they'll keep you their distance, but don't you go scrutinizing him, or looking for trouble, 'cause you'll find it with those buggers." They sat beside a brook to eat their lunch. Tristran produced the cottage loaf, the ripe red apples, and a round of cheese, hard, tart, and crumbly, that his mother had given him. And although the little man eyed them both suspiciously, he wolfed them down and licked the crumbs of bread and cheese from his fingers and munched noisily on the apple. Then he filled a kettle from the brook and boiled it up for tea. "Suppose you tell me what you're about," said the little hairy man as they sat on the ground and drank their tea. Tristran thought for some moments, and then he said, "I come from the village of Wall, where there lives a young lady named Victoria Forrester, who is without peer among women, and it is to her, and to her alone, that I have given my heart. Her face is usual complement of bits," asked the little creature. "Eyes, nose, teeth, all the usual, of course." "Well, then you can skip that stuff," said the little hairy man. "We'll take it all as said. So, what damn fool silly thing has this young lady got you a doing of?" Tristran put down his wooden cup of tea and stood up, offended. "What?" he said, in what he was certain were lofty and scornful tones. "Would possibly make you imagine that my lady love would have sent me on some foolish errand?" The little man stared up at him with eyes like beads of jet. "Because that's the only reason a lad like you would be stupid enough to cross the border into fairy. The only ones who ever come here from your lands are the minstrels, and the lovers, and the mad. And you don't look much of a minstrel, and you're, pardon me for saying so, lad, but it's true, ordinary as cheese crumbs, so it's love if you ask me." "Because," announced Tristran, "every lover is in his heart a madman, and is in his head a minstrel." "Really?" said the little man doubtfully. "I never noticed. So there's some young lady. Has she sent you here to seek your fortune? That used to be very popular. You get young fellas wandering all over looking for the hoard of gold that some poor worm or ogre had taken absolute centuries to accumulate." No, not my fortune. It was more of a promise I made to this lady I mentioned. We were talking, and I was promising her things, and we saw this falling star, and I promised to bring it to her. And it fell. He waved an arm toward a mountain range somewhere in the general direction of the sunrise. "Over there." The little hairy man scratched his chin, or his muzzle. It might well have been his muzzle. "You know what I would do?" "No," said Tristran, hope rising within him. "What?" The little man wiped his nose. "I'd tell her to go shove her face in the pig pen and go out and find another one who'll kiss you without asking for the earth. You're bound to find one. You can hardly throw half a brick back in the lands you come from without hitting one." "There are no other girls," said Tristran confidently. The little man sniffed, and they packed up their things and walked on together. "Did you mean it?" said the little man. "About the falling star?" "Yes," said Tristran. I'd not mention it about it if I were you," said the little man. "There's those as would be unhealthily interested in such information. Better keep mum, but never lie." "So what should I say?" "Well," he said, "for example, if they ask where you've come from, you could say, 'behind me,' and if they ask where you're going, you'd say, 'in front of me.'" "I see," said Tristran. The path they were walking became harder to discern. A cold breeze ruffled Tristran's hair, and he shivered. The path led them into a gray wood of thin, pale birch trees. "Do you think it will be far?" asked Tristran. "To the star?" "How many miles to Babylon?" said the little man rhetorically. "This wood wasn't here last time I was this way," he added. How many miles to Babylon? Recited Tristran to himself as they walked through the grey wood. 60 miles and 10. Can I get there by candlelight? Yes, and back again. Yes, if your feet are nimble and light, you can get there by candlelight. That's the one, said the little hairy man, his head questing from side to side as if he were preoccupied or a little nervous. It's only a nursery rhyme, said Tristran. Only a nursery? Bless me, there's some on this side of the wall who would give 7 years' hard toil for that little cantrip. Back where you come from, you mutter 'em to babes alongside of Rockabye Baby or Rub-a-Dub-Dub without a second thought. Are you chilled, lad? Well, now that you mention it, I am a bit cold, yes. Look behind you. Can you see a path? Tristran blinked. The grey woods soaked up light and color and distance. He had thought they were following a path, but now that he tried to see the path, it shimmered and vanished like an optical illusion. He had taken that tree and that rock as markers of the path, but there was no path, only the mark, and the twilight and the pale trees. Now we're for it, said the hairy man in a small voice. Should we run? Tristran removed his bowler hat and held it in front of him. The little man shook his head. Not much point, he said. We've walked into a trap, and we'll still be in it even if we runs. He walked over to the nearest tree, a tall, pale, birch-like tree trunk, and kicked it hard. Some dry leaves fell, and then something white tumbled from the branches to the earth with a dry, whispering sound. Tristran walked over to it and looked down. It was the skeleton of a bird, clean and white and dry. The little man shivered. I could castle, he told Tristran, but there's no one I could castle with who'd be any better off than we are. There's no escape by flying, not judging by that thing. He nudged the skeleton with one paw-like foot. And your sort of people could never learn to burrow, not that that'd do us much good. Perhaps we could arm ourselves, said Tristran. Arm ourselves? Before they come. Before they come? Why, they're here, you puddin'-head. It's the trees themselves. We're in a searwood. Searwood? It's me own fault. I should have been paying more attention to where we was going. Now you'll never get your star, and I'll never get my merchandise. One day some other poor bugger lost in the wood will find our skeletons picked clean as whistles, and that'll be that. Tristran stared about him. In the gloom, it seemed that the trees were crowding about more thickly, although he had seen nothing actually move. He wondered if the little man were being foolish or imagining things. Something stung his left hand. He slapped at it, expecting to see an insect. He looked down to see a pale yellow leaf. It fell to the ground with a rustle. On the back of his hand, a veining of red, wet blood welled up. The wood whispered about them. Is there anything we can do? Tristran asked. Nothing I could think of. If only we knew where the true path was. Even a searwood couldn't destroy the true path. Just hide it from us, lure us off of it. The little man shrugged and sighed. Tristran reached his hand up and rubbed his forehead. I do know where the path is, he said. He pointed. It's down that way. The little man's bead-black eyes glittered. Are you sure? Yes, sir. Through that copse and up a little way to the right. That's where the path is. How do you know? Asked the man. I know, replied Tristran. Right. Come on. And the little man took his burden and ran, slowly enough that Tristran, his leather bag swinging and banging against his legs, his heart pounding, his breath coming in gasps, was able to keep up. No, not that way, over to the left, shouted Tristran. Branches and thorns ripped and tore at his clothes. They ran on in silence. The trees seemed to have arranged themselves into a wall. Leaves fell around them in flurries, stinging and smarting when they touched Tristran's skin, cutting and slicing at his clothes. He clambered up the hill, swiping at the leaves with his free hand, swatting at the twigs and branches with his bag. The silence was broken by something wailing. It was the little hairy man. He had stopped dead where he stood and his head thrown back, and he began to howl at the sky. Buck up, said Tristran. We're nearly there. He grasped the little hairy man's free hand in his own larger hand and pulled him forward. And then they were standing on the tree path, a swath of green sward running through the grey wood. Are we safe here? Asked Tristran, panting and looking about apprehensively. We're safe as long as we stay on the path, said the little hairy man, and he put down his burden, sat down on the grass of the path, and stared at the trees about them. The pale trees shook, although no wind blew. and it seemed to Tristran that they shook in anger. His companion had begun to shudder, his hairy fingers raking and stroking the green grass. Then he looked up. Then he looked up at Tristran. I don't suppose you have such a thing as a bottle of something spirituous upon you? Or perchance a pot of hot sweet tea? No, said Tristran, afraid not. The little man sniffed and fumbled at the lock of his huge pack. Turn round, he said to Tristran. No peeking. Tristran turned away. There was a rummaging, scuffling noise, then the sound of a lock clicking shut, and then, you can turn round if you like. The little man was holding an enamel bottle. He was tugging vainly at the stopper. Would you like me to help you with that? Tristran hoped the little hairy man would not be offended by his request. He should not have worried. His companion thrust the bottle into his hands. Here you go, he said. You got the fingers for it. Tristran tugged and pulled out the stopper of the bottle. He could smell something intoxicating, like honey mixed with wood smoke and cloves. He passed the bottle back to the little man. It's a crime to drink something as rare and good as this out of the bottle, said the little man. He untied the little wooden cup from his belt and, trembling, poured a small amount of an amber-colored liquid into it. He sniffed it, then sipped it. Then he smiled with small, sharp teeth. That's better. He passed the cup to Tristran. Sip it slowly, he said. It's worth a king's ransom, this bottle. Cost me 2 large blue-white diamonds, a mechanical bluebird which sang, and a dragon's scale. Tristran sipped the drink. It warmed him down to his toes and made him feel like his head was filled with tiny bubbles. Good, eh? Tristran nodded. Too good for the likes of you and me, I'm afraid. Still, it hits the spot in times of trouble, of which this is certainly one. Let's get out of this wood, said the little hairy man. Which way, though? That way, said Tristran, pointing to their left. The little man stoppered and pocketed his little bottle, shouldered his pack, and the two of them walked together down the green path through the gray wood. After several hours, the white trees began to thin, and then they were through the sere wood and walking between 2 rough stone walls along a high bank. When Tristran looked back the way they had come, there was no sign of any wood at all. The way behind them was purple-headed, heathery hills. Well, we could stop here, said his companion. There's stuff we need to talk about. Sit down. He put down his enormous bag and climbed on top of it. So he was looking down at Tristran, who sat on a rock beside the road. There's something here. There's something here I'm not properly getting. Now, tell me, where are you from? Wall, said Tristran. I told you. Who's your father and mother? My father's name is Dunstan Thorn. My mother is Daisy Thorn. Dunstan Thorn. I met your father once. He put me up for the night. Not a bad chap, although he doesn't half go on a bit while a fellow's trying to get a little kit. He scratched his muzzle. See, this, I thought so. This is the guy from the first chapter who was, like, sleeping in Dunstan's barn. I don't think it's the same voice that I did for him then, but I like this one better. Still doesn't explain. There isn't anything unusual in your family, is there? My sister Louisa can wiggle her ears. The little man wiggled his own large hairy ears dismissively. No, not that. No, that's not it, he said. I was thinking more of a grandmother who was a famous enchantress, or an uncle who was a prominent warlock, or a brace of fairies somewhere in the family tree. None that I know of, admitted Tristran. The little man changed his tack. Where's the village of Wall? He asked. Tristran pointed. Where are the debatable hills? Tristran pointed once more without hesitation. Where's the Catavarian Isles? Tristran pointed to the southwest. He had not known there were debatable hills or Catavarian Isles until the little man had mentioned them, but he was certain in himself or of their location as he was of the whereabouts of his own left foot or the nose on his face. Now thens, do you know where his vastness the Fremont and Muskish is? Tristran shook his head. Do you know where his vastness the Fremont and Muskish's transluminary citadel is? Tristran pointed with certainty. And what of Paris? The one in France? Tristran thought for a moment. Well, if Wall's over there, I suppose that Paris must be sort of in the same sort of direction, mustn't it? Let's see, said the little hairy man, talking to himself as much as to Tristran. You can find places in Fairy, but not in your world save for Wall, and that's a boundary. You can't find people, but... Tell me, lad, can you find this star you're looking for? Tristran pointed immediately. It's that way, he said. That's good, but it still doesn't explain nothing. You hungry? A bit, and I'm tattered and torn, said Tristran, fingering the large holes in his trousers and in his coat where their branches and thorns had seized at him and the leaves had cut at him as he ran. Look at my boots. What's in your bag? Tristran opened his Gladstone bag. Apples, cheese, half a cottage loaf, and a pot of fish paste. My penknife. I've got a change of underwear and a couple of pairs of woolen socks. I suppose I should have brought more clothes. Keep the fish paste, said the traveling companion, and he rapidly divided the remaining food into 2 equal piles. You done me a good turn, he said, munching a crisp apple, and I doesn't forget something like that. First we'll get your clothes took care of, and then we'll send you off after your star. Yes? That's extremely kind of you, said Tristran nervously, slicing his cheese onto the crust of bread. Right, said the little hairy man. Let's find you a basket. At dawn, hold on, I'm just going to check to see where we have the next chapter break. One sec. Okay. Not too long away. What time is it? Yeah, we can do it. I hope that this is interesting. I hope that this is entertaining for you guys. I just wanted to say. At dawn, 3 lords of Stormhold rode down the craggy mountain road in a coach pulled by 6 black horses. The horses were bobbing black plumes. The coach was fresh painted in black, and each of the lords of Stormhold was dressed in mourning. In the case of Primus, this took the shape of a long black monkish robe. Tertius was dressed in the sober costume of a merchant in mourning, while Septimus wore a black doublet and hose, a black hat with a black feather in it, and looked for all the world like a foppish assassin from a minor Elizabethan historical play. The lords of Stormhold eyed each other, one cautious, one wary, one blank. They said nothing. Had alliances been possible, Tertius might have sided with Primus against Septimus, but there were no alliances that could be made. The carriage clattered and shook. Once it stopped for each of the 3 lords to relieve themselves. Then it clattered on down the hilly road. Together the 3 lords of Stormhold had placed their father's remains in the Hall of Ancestors. Their dead brothers had watched them from the doors of the hall, but had said nothing. Toward evening, the coachman called out, "Not away!" And he reined his team outside. A tumble-down inn, built against what resembled the ruins of a giant's cottage. The 3 lords of Stormhold got out of the coach and stretched their cramped legs. Faces peered at them through the bottle-glass windows of the inn. The innkeeper, who was a choleric gnome of poor disposition, looked out of the door. "We'll need beds aired and a pot of mutton stew on the fire," he called. How many beds to be aired?" asked Letitia, the chambermaid, from the stairwell. 3, said the gnome. "I'll wager they have their coachman sleeping with the horses." 3, indeed, whispered Tilly, the pot girl, to Lacey, the ostler, when anyone could see a full 7 of those fine gentlemen standing in the road. "Oh, so she sees all the ghosts, I guess." "Oh, thank you." But when the lords of Stormhold entered, there were but 3 of them, and they announced that their coachman would sleep in the stables. Dinner was mutton stew and bread loaves, so hot and fresh they exhaled steam as they were cracked open, and each of the lords took an unopened bottle of the finest Burgundian, that's it, the finest Burgundian wine, for none of the lords would share a bottle with his fellows, not even permit the wine to be poured from the bottle into the goblet. This scandalized the gnome, who was of the opinion, not however uttered in the hearing of his guests, that the wine should be permitted to breathe. Their coachman ate his bowl of stew and drank 2 pots of ale and went to sleep in the stables. The 3 brothers went to their respective rooms and barred the doors. Tertius had slipped a silver coin to Letitia, the chambermaid, when she had brought him the warming pan for his bed, so he was not surprised at all when, shortly before midnight, there came a tapping on his door. She wore a one-piece white chemise, and curtsied to him as he opened the door, and smiled shyly. She held a bottle of wine in her hand. He locked the door behind them and led her to the bed, where, having first made her remove her chemise, and having examined her face and body by candlelight, and having kissed her on the forehead, lips, nipples, navel, and toes, and having extinguished the candle, he made love to her without speaking, in the pale moonlight. After some time, he grunted and was still. "There, lovey, was that good now?" asked Letitia. "Yes," said Tertius wearily, as if her words guarded some trap. "It was." "Would you be wanting another turn before I leave?" In reply, Tertius pointed between his legs. Why? Anyway, Letitia giggled. "We can have him upstanding again in a twinkling," she said. And she pulled out the cork from the bottle of wine she had carried in and had placed beside the bed and passed it to Tertius. "I'm gonna look ahead. La 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 la." Ah, okay. So, hold on. Just checking. So, we're gonna zoom ahead just a little tiny bit. Here we go. Tertius heard Letitia begin to scream as if from a very long way away. He was conscious of 4 familiar presences standing with him in the shadows beside the wall. "She was very beautiful," whispered Secundus. By the way, there's actually kind of no elaboration on what happened there. I'm not missing any of the action besides what you can anticipate was going on. It's just supposed to be very sudden and like, what happened? So Tertius heard Letitia. I'm sorry that I'm censoring this, but please understand. It's not super duper like explicit, but at the same time, I don't think it's YouTube friendly. So read the book if you want to know that stuff. Support the artist, support the author, and just buy the book yourself and check up on those bits. Okay, Tertius heard Letitia begin to scream as if from a very long way away. He was conscious of 4 other familiar presents standing with him in the shadows beside the wall. "She was very beautiful," whispered Secundus, and Letitia thought she heard the curtains rustle. "Septimus is most crafty," said Quintus. "That was the self-same preparation of Banbury's he slipped into my dish of eels." And Letitia thought she heard the wind howling down from the mountain crags. She opened the door to the household, woken by her screams, and a search ensued. Lord Septimus, however, was nowhere to be found, and one of the black stallions was gone from the stable in which the coachman slept and snored and could not be wakened. Lord Primus was in a foul mood when he arose the next morning. He declined to have Letitia put to death, stating she was a victim as much a victim of Septimus's craft as Tertius had been, but ordered that she accompany Tertius's body back to the castle of Stormhold. He left her 1 black horse to carry the body and a pouch of silver coins. It was enough to pay a villager of Notaway to travel with her, to ensure no wolves made off with the horse or his brother's remains, and to pay off the coachman when he finally awoke. And then, alone in the coach, pulled by a team of 4 coal-black stallions, Lord Primus left the village of Notaway in significantly worse temper than he had arrived there. Brevis arrived at the crossroads, tugging at a rope. The rope was attached to a bearded, horned, evil-eyed billy goat, which Brevis was taking to the market to sell. That morning, Brevis's mother had placed a single radish upon the table in front of him and said, "Brevis, son, this radish was all I was able to pull from the ground today. All our crops have failed and all our food is gone. We have nothing to sell but the billy goat. So I want you to halter the goat and take him to the market and sell him to a farmer. And with the coins you get for the goat, and you'll take nothing less than a florin, mark you, buy a hen, and buy corn and turnips, and perhaps we shall not starve. So Brevis had chewed his radish, which was woody and peppery to the tongue, and spent the rest of the morning chasing the goat about its pen, sustaining a bruise on the rib and a bite to his thigh in the process, and eventually, and with the help of a passing tinker, he had subdued the goat enough to have it haltered, and leaving his mother to bandage his tinker's goat-inflicted injuries, he dragged the billy goat toward the market. Sometimes the goat would take it into his head to charge on ahead, and Brevis would be dragged behind him, the heels of his boots grinding into the dried mud of the roadway until the goat would decide, suddenly and without warning, for no reason Brevis was able to discern, to stop. Then Brevis would pick himself up and return to dragging the beast. He reached the crossroads on the edge of the wood, sweaty and hungry and bruised, pulling an uncooperative goat. There was a tall woman standing at the crossroads. A circlet of silver sat in the crimson headpiece that surrounded her dark hair, and her dress was as scarlet as her lips. "What do they call you, boy?" she asked in a voice like musky brown honey. "They call me Brevis, ma'am," said Brevis, observing something strange behind the woman. It was a small cart, but there was nothing harnessed between the shafts. He wondered how it had ever gotten there. "Brevis," she purred. "Such a nice name. Would you like to sell me your goat, Brevis boy?" Brevis hesitated. "My mother told me I was to take the goat to the market," he said, "and to sell him for a hen and some corn and some turnips, and to bring her home the change." "How much did your mother tell you to take for the goat?" asked the woman in the scarlet kirtle. "Nothing less than a florin," he said. She smiled and held up one hand. Something glinted yellow. "Why, I will give you this golden guinea," she said, "enough to buy a coopful of hens and 100 bushels of turnips." The boy's mouth hung open. "Do we have a deal?" The boy nodded and thrust out the hand which held the billy goat's rope halter. "Here," was all he could say, visions of limitless wealth and turnips beyond counting tumbling through his head. The lady took the rope. Then she touched one finger to the goat's forehead between its yellow eyes and let go of the rope. Brevis expected the billy goat to bolt for the woods or down one of the roads, but it stayed where it was, as if frozen into position. Brevis held out his hand for the golden guinea. The woman looked at him then, examining him from the soles of his muddy feet to the sweaty cropped hair, and once more she smiled. "You know," she said, "I think that a matching pair would be so much more impressive than just one. Don't you?" Brevis did not know what she was talking about and opened his mouth to tell her so. But just then she reached out one long finger and touched the bridge of his nose between his eyes, and he found he could not say anything at all. She snapped her fingers, and Brevis the billy goat hastened to stand between the shafts of her cart, and Brevis was surprised to notice that he was walking on 4 legs, and he seemed to be no taller than the animal beside him. The witch woman cracked her whip, and her cart jolted off down the muddy road, drawn by a matched pair of horned white billy goats. The little hairy man had taken Tristran's ripped coat and trousers and waistcoat, and, leaving him covered by a blanket, had walked into the village which nestled in the valley between 3 heather-covered hills. Tristran sat under the blanket in the warm evening and waited. Lights flickered in the hawthorn bush behind him. He thought they were glowworms or fireflies, but on closer inspection, he perceived that they were tiny people flickering and flitting from branch to branch. He coughed politely. A score of tiny eyes stared down at him. Several of the little creatures vanished, others retreated high into the hawthorn bush, while a handful, braver than the others, flitted toward him. They began to laugh in high, bell-tinkling tones, pointing at Tristran in his broken boots and blanket and underclothes and bowler hat. Tristran blushed red and pulled the blanket about himself. One of the little folk sang, "Hankety-pankety, boy in a blanket, he's off on a goose chase to look for a star. Incontrovertibly journeys through fairy, strip off the blanket to see who you are." And another one saying, Tristran Thorn does not know why he was born, and a foolish oath has sworn, trews and coat and shirt are torn, so he sits here all forlorn, soon to face his true love's scorn. Tristran Thorn. "Be off with you, you silly thing," said Tristran, his face burning, and having nothing else to hand, he threw his bowler hat at them. Thus it was that when the little hairy man arrived back from the village of revelry, although why it was so called no man alive could say, for it was a gloomy, somber place, and had been for some time out of mind, he found Tristran sitting glumly beside a hawthorn bush, wrapped in a blanket and bewailing the loss of his hat. "They said cruel things about my true love," said Tristran. "Miss Victoria Forrester. How dare they?" "The little folk dare anything," said his friend, "and they talks a lot of nonsense, but they talks a lot of an awful lot of sense as well. You listen to them at your peril, and you ignore them at your peril too." "They said I was soon to face my true love's scorn." "Did they indeed?" The little hairy man was laying a variety of clothes out upon the grass. Even in the moonlight, Tristran could see that the clothes he was lying out bore no manner of resemblance to the clothes that Tristran had removed earlier in the day. In the village of Wall, men wore brown and gray and black, and even the reddest neckerchief worn by the readiest of farmers was soon faded by the sun and the rain into a more mannerly color. Tristran looked at the crimson and canary and russet cloth, at clothes which looked more like the costumes of traveling players on the contents of his the contents of his cousin Joan's charade set chest, and said, "My clothes? These are your clothes now," said the little hairy man proudly. "I traded 'em. This stuff's better quality. See, it won't rip and tear as easy, and it's neither tattered nor torn, and withal, you'll not stick out so much as a stranger. This is what people wears hereabouts, you see." Tristran contemplated making the rest of his quest wrapped in a blanket like a savage aboriginal from one of his school books. Then, with a sigh, he took off his boots and let the blanket fall to the grass, and, with the little hairy man as his guide, "No, no, laddie, those go over that. Mercy, what do they teach them nowadays?" He was soon dressed in his fine new clothes. The new boots fit him better than the old ones ever had. They certainly were fine new clothes, while clothes do not, as the saying would sometimes have it, make the man, and fine feathers do not make fine birds. Sometimes they can add a certain spice to a recipe. And Tristran Thorn in crimson and canary was not the same man that Tristran Thorn in his overcoat and Sunday suit had been. There was a swagger to his steps, a jauntiness to his movements that had not been there before. His chin went up instead of down, and there was a glint in his eyes that he had not possessed when he had worn a bowler hat. By the time they had eaten the meal, the little hairy man had brought back with him from revelry, which consisted of smoked trout, a bowl of fresh shelled peas, several small raisin cakes, and a bottle of small beer. Tristran felt quite at home with his new garb. "Now then," said the little hairy man, "you saved my life, laddie, back there in the Seer Wood, and your father, he done me a good turn back before you was born, and let it never be said that I'm a cove that don't pay his debts." Tristran began to mutter something about how his friend had already done more than enough for him, but the little hairy man ignored him and continued, "So I was a pondering, you know where your star is. You know where your star is, don't you?" Tristran pointed without hesitation to the dark horizon. "Now then, how far is it to your star? Do you know that?" Tristran had not given the matter any thought hitherto, but he found himself saying a man could walk only stopping to sleep while the moon waxed and waned above him a half-dozen times, crossing treacherous mountains and burning deserts before he reached the place where the star has fallen. It did not sound like the kind of thing that he would say at all, and he blinked with surprise. "As I thought," said the little hairy man, approaching his burden and bending over it so Tristran could not see how it unlocked. "And it's not like you're the only one who'll be looking for it. You remember what I told you before? About digging a hole to bury my dung in? Not that. About telling no one my true name nor my destination? Not nor yet that. Well, then what?" "How many miles to Babylon?" recited the man. "Oh, yes, that. Can I get there by candlelight, there and back again? Only it's a candle wax, you see. Most candles won't do it. This one took a lot of finding." And he pulled out a candle stub for the size of a crab apple and handed it to Tristran. Tristran could see nothing in any way out of the ordinary about the candle stub. It was a wax candle, not tallow, and it was much used and melted. The wick was charred and black. "What do I do with it?" he asked. "All in good time," said the little hairy man, and took something from his pack. "Take this too, you'll need it." It glittered in the moonlight. Tristran took it. The little man's gift seemed to be a thin silver chain with a loop at each end. It was cold and slippery to the touch. What is it? The usual, cat's breath and fish scales and moonlight on a mill pond, melted and smithed and forged by the dwarves. You be needing it to bring your star back with you. I will? Oh, yes. Tristran let the chain fall from into his palm. It felt like quicksilver. Where do I keep it? I have no pockets in these confounded clothes. Wrap it around your wrist until you need it. Like that. There you go. But you've got a pocket in your tunic under there, see? Tristran found the concealed pocket. Above it there was a small buttonhole, and in the buttonhole he placed the snowdrop, the glass flower that his father had given him as a luck token when he had left Wall. He wondered whether it was in fact bringing him luck, and if it were, was it good or bad luck? Tristran stood up. He held his leather bag tightly in his hand. Now then, said the little hairy man, this is what you gotta do. Take up the candle in your right hand. I'll light it for you. And then walk to your star. You'll use the chain to bring it back here. There's not much wick left in the candle, so you'd better be snappy about it and step lively. Any dawdling and you'll regret it. Feet be nimble and light, yes? I suppose so, yes, said Tristran. He stood expectantly. The little hairy man passed a hand over the candle, which lit with a flame yellow above and blue below. There was a gust of wind, but the flame did not flicker, even in the slightest bit. Tristran took the candle in his hand and he began to walk forward. The candlelight illuminated the world, every tree and every bush and blade of grass. With Tristran's next step, he was standing beside a lake, and the candlelight shone brightly on the water. And then he was walking through the mountains, through lonely crags, where the candlelight was reflected in the eyes of the creatures of the high snows. And then he was walking through the clouds, which, while not entirely substantial, still supported his weight and comfort. And then, holding tightly to his candle, he was underground, and the candlelight glinted back at him from the wet cave walls. Now he was in the mountains once more. And then he was on a road through wild forest, and he glimpsed a chariot being pulled by two goats, being driven by a woman in a red dress, who looked, for the glimpse he got of her, the way Boadicea was drawn in his history books. And another step, and he was in a leafy glen, and he could hear the chuckle of water as it splashed and sang its way into a small brook. He took another step, but he was still in the glen. There were high ferns and elm trees and foxgloves in abundance, and the moon had set in the sky. He held up the candle, looking for a fallen star, a rock, perhaps, or a jewel, but he saw nothing. He heard something, though, under the babbling of the brook, a sniffling and a swallowing, the sound of someone trying not to cry. Hello? Said Tristran. The sniffling stopped, but Tristran was certain he could see a light beneath a hazel tree, and he walked toward it. Excuse me, he said, hoping to pacify whoever was sitting beneath the hazel tree and praying that it was not more of the little people who had stolen his hat. I'm looking for a star. In reply, a clod of wet earth flew out from under the tree, hitting Tristran on the side of his face. It stung a little, and fragments of the earth fell down to his collar, and under his clothes. I won't hurt you, he said loudly. This time, as another clod of earth came hurtling toward him, he ducked out of the way, and it smashed into the elm tree behind him. He walked forward. Go away, said a voice all raw and gulping as if it had just been crying. Just go away and leave me alone. She was sprawled awkwardly beneath the hazel tree, and she gazed up at Tristran with a scowl of complete unfriendliness. She hefted another clod of mud at him, menacingly, but did not throw it. Her eyes were red and raw. Her hair was so fair it was almost white. Her dress was of blue silk, which shimmered in the candlelight. She glittered as she sat there. Please don't throw any more mud at me, pleaded Tristran. Look, I didn't mean to disturb you. It's just there's a fallen star somewhere around here. There's a star fallen somewhere around here, and I have to get it back before the candle burns out. I broke my leg, said the young lady. I'm sorry, of course, said Tristran. But the star. I broke my leg, she told him, sadly, when I fell. And with that, she heaved her lump of mud at him. Glittering dust fell from her arm as it moved. The clod of mud hit Tristran in his chest. Go away, she sobbed, burying her face in her arms. Go away and leave me alone. You're the star, said Tristran, comprehension dawning. And you're a clodpole, said the girl bitterly, and a ninny, and a numbskull, and a lackwit, and a coxcomb. Yes, said Tristran, I suppose I am at that. And with that, he unwound one end of the silver chain and slipped it around the girl's slim wrist. He felt the loop of the chain tighten about his own. She stared up at him bitterly. What? She asked in a voice that was suddenly beyond outrage, beyond hate. Do you think you are doing? Taking you home with me, said Tristran. I made an oath. And at that, the candle stub guttered violently, the last of the wick afloat in the pool of wax. For a moment, the candle flame flared high, illuminating the glen and the girl and the chain, unbreakable, that ran from her wrist to his. Then the candle went out. Tristran stared at the star, at the girl, and with all his might managed to say nothing at all. Can I get there by candlelight, he thought, there and back again. But the candlelight was gone, and the village of Wall was 6 months' hard travel from here. I just want you to know, said the girl coldly, that whoever you are, and whatever you intend with me, I shall give you no aid of any kind, nor shall I assist you, and I shall do whatever it is in my power to frustrate your plans and devices. And then she added with feeling, Idiot! Said Tristran. Can you walk? No, she said, my leg's broken. Are you deaf as well as stupid? Do your kind sleep? He asked her. Of course, but not at night. At night we shine. Well, he said, I'm going to try to get some sleep. I can't think of anything else to do. It's been a long day for me, what with everything. And maybe you should try to sleep too. We've got a long way to go. The sky was beginning to lighten. Tristran put his head on his leather bag in the glen and did his best to ignore the insults and imprecations that came his way from the girl in the blue dress at the end of the chain. He wondered what the little hairy man would do when Tristran did not return. He wondered what Victoria Forrester was doing at the moment and decided she was probably asleep in her bed, in her bedroom, in her father's farmhouse. He wondered whether 6 months was a long walk and what they would eat on the way. He wondered what stars ate. And then he slept. Dunderhead, bumpkin, dolt, said the star. And then she sighed and made herself as comfortable as she could under the circumstances. The pain from her leg was dull but continual. She tested the chain about her wrist, but it was tight and fast, and she could neither slip from it nor break it. Cretinous, verminous oath, she muttered. And then she, too, slept. And that's the end of the chapter. What do you guys think? Yeah. What about it? Do you have any comments? Not bad. Okay. Yeah, I like that it's, you don't quite know what to expect because, you don't quite know what to expect because, it's not 100% like the movie. There are things that are different. Like, we didn't even have the little man. We didn't even have, in the movie, we didn't even have, I don't know. The queen is not the queen. The witch is like, I feel like she has more character here too. And I like our star from what we've just gotten of her. Yeah. I like her. What do you mean about your brain is underwhelmingly not cooperative? Is it because you can't remember the movie? Yeah, me too. You have this kind of like gentleness and stuff about her, but at the same time, like, her brusqueness too. Me too. It's okay. I just hope that it's entertaining so far. I'm glad. Yeah, I'm looking forward to see where things go from here. We're already down another prince, so we only have Primus and Septimus that are left. Everyone else is dead. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. The characters just speak really clearly to me in terms of how they sound. In this case, I'm glad that you're enjoying those voices too. What do you think is going to happen next? Do you have any theories? Do you think it's going to follow the path of the movie, or do you think it's going to go in a completely different direction? Like, for whoever remembers the movie. Yeah, right? The world that is introduced in the movie, I feel like, is a little bit different than what we get in the books. Like, it just feels different. Like, it's comedic. So the movie and the book, they're both comedic, but they're comedic in different ways. And I don't see the jokes that were made in the movie necessarily being made in the book. Like, what I'm thinking about in particular was when they were first looking out over the kingdom, and oh yeah, because at first in the movie, I think there's another prince that is still alive. They're looking out over the kingdom, and they're looking out rather out from the window of the king's quarters, and the prince mentions that he sees his kingdom outside there, and at that point, like, Septimus takes a hint, goes over and pushes that prince out the window, and the king, like, laughs even from his deathbed. And I think that's the funny thing, is like, this feeble old man is laughing about one of his sons just being pushed out of the window to his death. And that doesn't happen here. And I was wondering if it was going to or not, and it doesn't. And yeah, it wouldn't have felt right for the book as it is. Trying to think of, like, what else. I feel like the book is a little more, like, even graphic than the movie was. It's just a different feel, like, to both stories. Like, same story, but separate entities. What are our feelings about Tristran? I mean, he was pretty naive and like, he was kind of doltish in the book too. In the movie, like, at the beginning, he's not super likable at the beginning, you know? Like, I feel like that's fairly on par. I feel like they're very similar in that. However, we are getting to see more of Tristran than we did in the movie at this point in time. It's interesting to me how in the movie they kind of like speed through things. They have his father give him the Babylon candle, the chain, things like that. And they make him light the Babylon candle and like use that to get over wall and get to the star like right away. I like the addition of this like other character. We don't know who he is, I guess we kind of do because he was there in the beginning of the story, sleeping in Dunstan's barn. But he's kind of new because he's not in the movie at all. And I like him and I like their interaction so far. I hope he stays there. My earrings keep getting knocked around by the scrunchie. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. They're like these hearts with these bunnies in them. For some reason, they just felt like a good match with what I was wearing today. Thank you. Do you guys have anything else that you'd like to talk about? Anything that you'd like to add? Anything? Last call. Yeah. Me too. Yeah, so far we're getting like I think a little bit more from everyone. It's weird because they show the cottage with the witches, but like or the Lilum. And I vaguely remember in the movie they kind of combined the two sets. So they mentioned that it's only in the mirror, in the black mirror, that you see like that big hall. That fancy hall. But if I remember correctly, in the movie, they show the exterior of the cottage. Actually, I can't even remember. I can't remember if they show a cottage or a hall. I think, like, I remember that it's there's definitely like that fancy hall there. I think it's just like a mixture of the two sets. Like, it's not that you're seeing one of them through the mirror and it doesn't like. It's like they're blended, from what I remember, which is interesting. Anyway, though, I think that'll be all for now. Thank you for watching. And next week we'll be back. That's Sunday around 5:00. To continue Stardust. Yeah, like always, go ahead and support the author and try to pick up a copy of this book if you'd like. It's a great one. And yeah, I will see you guys then. Happy New Year. Merry belated Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, all of the holidays in the holiday season. Merry belated them. Happy belated them. And yeah, I will see you guys then. For now, this is, oh yeah, please also go ahead, like, comment, and subscribe. If you have anything that you'd like to be immortalized, go ahead and leave that in the comments. If you have any questions after the fact that, you just thought about, or any comments that you've just thought about, go ahead, leave them there. It lets me know that you guys are interested and enjoying and helps me keep this up. So yeah, we'll be back next Sunday at 5 o'clock. And for now, it has been Sky. Bye-bye.